There we go. We should be live on Facebook now. Looks like we are indeed live. Hopefully we'll get some people joining us on this. I'll give it a couple more minutes and we'll get started. Thank you. Hello guys, ready for the Cryptids across America? Yeah. Awesome. Come on in, take a seat wherever you would like. We'll get started here in just a couple of minutes. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everybody for coming. We are so very excited to have TC Hendricks with us today. She is our guest presenter. I forgot to write up your blurb about to introduce you, so I apologize for that. But we've got about 7 of us here. About half of them are on the other side of the seating, so I'm afraid you can't see them. But we're so very excited, so I'll turn the time over to you. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you for letting me come and do this, even though I can't be there in person. I apologize for that. But yeah, I'm also super excited to be doing this. This is like one of my favorite things that I get to do as someone who, tries to make a living off of stories, is talk about stories. And spooky season is one of my favorites. So I'm really excited to get into it, but as I know I'm not like a familiar face to everybody, I figured I'd start with like who I am and why I'm the one sitting here telling you about cryptids in our country. So a little bit about me. I go professionally by TC Hendricks. You might know me as Tilly, depending. And usually if you've caught me at LTUB for these past few years, where I've been a presenter and a speaker and a moderator and everything, my hair is usually purple on top. So it's not right now, as I am cooking another human, and I can't stand the smell of anything stronger than my dog's breakfast, and sometimes not even that. So hair dye is off the menu for me. But if you come to LTUE up in Provo, that's the Life, the Universe of Everything Symposium. Happens every year in February at the Marriott in Provo. And I will hopefully be there again this year, except I'll be the one with hopefully purple hair and a baby strapped to me, so that should make it a little bit easier to spot me. A little bit about me. I am first and foremost a parent, trying to make this author thing work kind of at the same time. I don't want to stay on the side because both the children that I have in real life and the children that have come from my brain are very important to me. I love all things milk. I just, that's just one of those things that connects people sometimes. I had the fortune of being able to do a focus group for dairy the other night, and I thought that was hilarious because I got paid in milk to talk about milk. I love to cook. I have a bit of ADHD, and as I am pregnant right now, I'm not allowed to take my medicine, so let that be a warning. I'm sorry if we get off topic. I'm also something of a horror weenie. I love spooky things, but I can't handle spooky things, which is very funny because what I tend to write tends to be horror crossover. For instance, this is a little bit of art that I have commissioned on the first novel I finished. It is not finished yet. It needs a rework. But I like to make my own spooky dudes. And the story's all about these guys going on an adventure to more or less stop the spooky dudes and their boss. But the one you'll probably see from me first is about my disaster child, Ethan. And this, I'm not a cover designer, so I apologize. But the book that I am hoping will be my debut, hopefully within the next year, is going to be called The 157 Deaths of the Immortal Ethan Ellis. And it's about a very unlucky immortal who kind of has to find his faith in humanity again. And I am hoping to get some advanced readers soon so I can get more feedback on it. I've had a few so far. But yeah, if you can catch my author page, that's primarily where I'll be fishing for people who like to read spooky things. PG-13 and up, I will say, just because they do tend to be spooky. But enough about me. We're not here to hear about me. We're here to hear about our nation full of cryptids. And so some of us may not be familiar. What is a cryptid? So there's a lot of definitions. You could go to Google and get the definition, but really it's just anything that is said to exist that we can't really prove it exists. So these are usually specific creatures, entities, or phenomena, depending on how broad you want to get with the definition. So you'll find some people who have a very strict definition of cryptids, like things like Bigfoot. And then some people will get broader with it, where they're like, we're also going to include these spook lights or these ghost lights that happen. For me, I've tried to narrow it down to animals and monsters and entities that are specifically talked about, but there are a few exceptions. They're most commonly, when you think of cryptids, you're thinking of specific creatures and fantastic animals. It's anything really that falls under cryptozoology, which is technically defined as a pseudoscience, but we're not going to let that stop us because we're here to have fun. And in this, the first being that there are so many spooky dudes in our country that there's no possible way I could list all of them. And so this is going to be heavily based on what I'm most familiar with, and I apologize for that. We also tend to see this huge geographic difference where there's not a ton of cryptids that are said to be native to like the central areas of the U.S., and we will get into that in a minute as well. The American Southeast just has a lot more of them, and so we're going to see a lot more of them being in the eastern half of the U.S., for which I apologize because I know you guys are not in the eastern half of the U.S., but it's still, we're one big country, we're going to claim all of them. Sometimes we get into some sticky situations with these legends, so I'm not going to touch anything that's heavily rooted in anything that's been used against certain populations. So some of these stories are going to be tied up in a lot of people viewing other people as less than human and viewing their cultures as less than human. And that's not cool. Some things just can't be sanitized away from their origins. Sometimes you get things that's like, it started off that way, now it's its own thing, but sometimes people still get touchy about it, you know. We're gonna be careful about those hazy middle ground kind of things. For example, I consider including a legend from Hawaii, but there is some debate as to whether or not the entity, the sort of legend in question, came from like kind of unpleasant perceptions of an indigenous people of the area. So I just decided not to include it because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and I also don't want to like spread stuff that we think is fine but is actually not fine. To that end, there are some things that are closed practices that cultures and religions have specifically said, hey, if you're not part of this, I'd rather you not talk about it, you just don't have the context. So for some of those things, we're not going to get into it because we want to be respectful. We don't want to take things away from their original context. And so I'm always going to default to the culture of Oregon's opinion on that, or if I can't find an official, like, this is the generally accepted opinion, I just kind of like scoot around and go to something else because I want to be respectful of all different belief systems. A few more disclaimers. Some of these are we're going to have a lot of information about them, and some of them we're not. That's just kind of the nature of these things. Some things have been really studied, like Bigfoot. Everyone loves a Bigfoot, and so there's entire shows dedicated to Bigfoot. And then you get into some of these more niche, like local legends and spooky guys, and there's not a lot on them. So some of these are going to have pages of slides, and some are not. And if I miss your favorite, I'm sorry. People really like stories. There's a lot of stories. There's a lot of cryptids that we could have included here. And if I missed your favorite, I'm really sorry. Please don't come for me. Let me know after. I always love learning about these sorts of things. But we just can't possibly get to all of them, which makes me sad. But that's what we're working with. So where are these cryptids coming from? Where are we getting these stories? And really the easiest way to say it would be that really, where don't they come from? But we're going to find some similarities in the origins of a lot of these stories, especially here in the United States. So first is just that people really like telling stories. Wherever you get a group of people, you're going to get stories about the area in which they live. That's just, I feel like, part of what makes us human. I'm not an anthropologist, so I can't like say we're like, you know, have to be official or anything, but that's my personal position. We get all the way back to petroglyphs and cave paintings and stuff. So people have been telling stories since the dawn of time, whether that's written down or orally. Then you kind of add in the history of our country and how it came to be what it is today. You start to see a little bit of where some of these stories might have come from. We have a ton of cryptids, not only because we're big, but because we started out with a lot of native societies. Because the country was big, they tended to be very separate. And then you get people coming over to these native societies, and they're hearing these stories without any context. And so they're spreading them without that same context. And maybe that gets adopted into their belief system, or maybe they just kind of share around as, oh, I heard them say this one time, you know, and then it passes down from there. You also get these people bringing their own beliefs and mythologies. We see Cornish and Devon mythology kind of transplanted directly into a lot of places, and we'll get into that a little bit later specifically. But you get Gaelic and Celtic influences, you get Germanic influences, and all these different religions and myths that got brought over and then they got mushed together. satellite image of our nation, but I want to point out a few things. Over on the East Coast, it's really, really green. It's like a deep, dense green. And you start moving toward the center, and it's a little bit brown. Then it's kind of lumpy, really lumpy. In Utah. And then way over there, it gets kind of green again. And that's not even going into like Alaska, you know, where it's kind of like white and brown. But when the first European settlers came over to like settle in the area, they ended up right about there. That's in the middle of all the green. And what the green is some really, really dense forested areas. And it's just kind of wilderness country at this point. There were native nations that lived there, but they weren't having huge urban centers like you would find in London. So these settlers get there, and when we say, oh, going out to the country in a place like England, this is what they're thinking of, right? They're thinking of cute rolling hills and cottages and sheep and maybe some little windbreak trees, maybe a mole or a fen or two in here. And then they come over here, and this is what they find. Nothing but trees. And not only trees, you've got huge waterfalls and hidden cliffs. You've got rivers the size of ocean liners, which didn't even exist at the time. But you could park that ship that blocked the Suez Canal, you could park that sideways from the Mississippi River and have room to go around it on both sides. It's mind-boggling how big these rivers are. These people are coming from a place where a river is somewhere you can throw a rock across. And it's got a cute little bridge over it. And then they get here and they're like, what is that? For instance, my daughter, she actually grew up in Utah. We're currently living in Virginia. I had the opportunity to take her on a little bit of a trip over Labor Day weekend, and we crossed the Allegheny River. And she saw it, and she said, wow, that's a big lake. And I had to tell her, no, that's actually a river. And she did not comprehend this, that this had a current and a flow to it, and it was like a river, because she's thinking of the Provo River. That was the only river she'd ever really known. And to compare to something like the Allegheny or the Monongahela, it's huge. And the Provo River is just a little bitty stream. It's fast, but it's not big like this. And that's the kind of situation a lot of people were coming from. You also get totally foreign landscapes like cypress swamps and bayous and all these different landscapes. And it's just vast beyond comprehension. This is just in the east. And then you get some plants that are weird. It's actually really cute if you start looking at the records of when the guy who discovered the Venus flytrap first discovered them. He's losing his mind over it because he is like he's an amateur botanist, and he is from Europe. I don't know what this plant is, and it's fascinating. So it's full of all this kind of stuff, and that's not even getting into the wildlife. So black bears. We're actually going to end up talking a lot about black bears tangentially. And I just want to put into context that bears were extinct in Great Britain, even by the time the colonies in the West starting to be formed. Bears have been extinct for a long time. People might have seen a bear. They might have seen images of bear. They might have been able to see a captive bear that was brought from other places in Europe. But it definitely wouldn't have been this guy. Black bears are extremely curious, and their curiosity is destructive. They also happen to smell really bad. I don't know if anyone's ever met a black bear, but it smells like he has been imbibing a certain smokable substance and then rolling around in dog food. He smells really bad. And they were everywhere. There's not so many nowadays, but back during the colonial era, there were so many more animals of all kinds, and they were bigger. We've hunted a lot of the big ones out of the gene pool, so now they're a lot smaller, but they were bigger back then. So these people who've never seen a bear in their life, or may have only seen a captive bear, come here and all of a sudden these guys are rooting around their barns at night. That's got to be terrifying. And so you actually see a ton of cryptids that probably have their origin in people not understanding the behavior of black bears. Then you also have reptiles, and just fun fact, Great Britain has 6 reptiles total. I had, growing up, 6 venomous snake species in the state where I grew up. I'm from Arkansas, and that's the same amount of total reptiles as there are native to Great Britain these days. I don't know what I would have done if I'd never seen a reptile, let alone one as big as an American alligator. And these guys, again, were way bigger before people started choking into them. You get things like rattlesnakes, snapping turtles that are the size of children. It's insane. You get giant birds, you get giant fish, and then the further west you go, the bigger and more freaky the wildlife gets. You go into the Pacific Ocean, you're seeing orcas. Those, I mean, they're kind of scary in real life. Let's be real. Orcas deserve respect and they're kind of. But imagine if you've never seen a whale or any of that. You got to put your on a boat and maybe you saw a whale, but then you see these guys off the coast. What is that? You get wolves, which were hunted to extinction in Great Britain way before any of the colonists would have ever been alive, and were declining rapidly in the rest of Europe. You get wildcats, the size of bears and wolves. There's only one wildcat species in Great Britain these days, and it's the size of a house cat. Compare that to a cougar. You get bison, which I don't know what I would have thought if I had seen that in my own experience. It's been a cute little Jersey cow. Then moose, that alone could be a cryptid, especially if you've never seen one before. So my point in saying all of this and bringing all of this up is that these people were totally out of their depth, and it was scary, but it was also really cool. And so you find records early on of people trying to tell their friends about these things that they're seeing, and it reads like they're on some kind of substance because they just don't have a way to express the things that they're seeing. They're just so foreign. So all of that is to say that when European settlers are coming over here to this beautiful, bizarre nation of ours, they're finding natural phenomena, they're freaking out about it, understandably. Like, I'm not saying this to belittle our ancestors, right? Like, this is probably understandable. Then you add that to the mishmash of cultures, both native that are blending with the settlers, but also the different regions of Europe that are coming over here, and they're in close proximity, and they're telling stories, and maybe there's a language barrier, and it combines together into this really cool sort of less a melting pot and more of a tossed salad of stuff that you find in these earlier records that then get passed down as these stories. And because the spread of information was so slow and unreliable, we didn't have a phone we could pick up and call our friend, through colonies north. It could take months to get a letter partway down the coast, if it ever got there, because we were developing these systems of communication at the same time that there's more and more people coming over. So you get a lot of he said, she said, and you get people repeating things that they've heard. And so maybe you're going to blame your lost chickens on that monster that Fred told you about. People will exaggerate. And when you don't have TV, telling stories is a huge pastime. So there's a big tradition of oral storytelling that you find still, especially in more rural areas, and that was alive and was rooted in this history. So really just all these things combined with our desire as people to believe and to be part of these stories, you get some really fantastical tales. So couple final disclaimers. You may have guessed in all of that. Do I take a strict literal interpretation of these stories? No. But am I your boss? No. Um, I think it's fun. I think it's, personally, I love knowing the history and the origins of these things. It makes it more fun to me as someone who makes my own stories. But, you know, if there's folks out there in the crowd who are like, no, I see Bigfoot, he lives, like, I'm not going to tell you what to believe. I'm not going to tell you what to think. And so we're going to go into this with a sense of fun. We're going to go into this with a, yeah, let's go ahead and talk about it as though it were real, but sometimes we'll also get into the backstory behind it, just because I personally think it's neat. It goes back to that, like, sorry, this is heavily biased. This is just my take on it. So, all of that said, let's get into it. Let's talk about our nation full of really fun dudes. And I have decided to group them in a very professional, very well-researched system. This is just me goofing around trying to find similarities in a lot of these because there are so many. I had to narrow it down somehow. So I apologize again if there are people out there. I don't know if they get degrees in cryptozoology. If any of y'all are ahead of me on that, like I apologize. But I've divided it into freshwater monsters, creepy dogs, Bigfoots, boogeymen, spooky dudes, aka the guys who kind of walk around on two legs and look like people but they're not, and team players, which are kind of collective entities. So let's dive right in with our freshwater monsters. The similarities here are that these are all monsters that are primarily associated with large permanent bodies of fresh water. I had to exclude these sea serpents and sea monsters and stuff just because there's so much that goes into it and you can't really narrow it down by geography because oceans are huge. So these are specific bodies of fresh water with one exception. Their nature, it requires that they are in an aquatic habitat. So usually that looks like reptilian or fishy bodies. You got scales, maybe gills. You also see that a lot of these guys are rarely violent and rarely malevolent. Again, there is an exception to this, and it's kind of closer to the end. But sometimes you see them portrayed as like a guardian spirit or the embodiment of this body of water. So those are kind of the things to keep an eye out for in categorizing yourself a freshwater monster. You also note that for the most part, these are singular entities. It's not like a species of these things. It's like there's one of them. We're going to start out in Georgia with the Altamaha, which can be kind of strange to say it a couple times, it makes you laugh. So it's found in Darien, Georgia, in the Altamaha River. It was first recorded pre-colonially by the Muskogee Creek culture in the Ottomah tribe. You see that actually carried over into the name of the river. What it is we're looking at our classic river monster. We got a body like a porpoise. It was first described by some early mariners. You see it is pretty close to the coast. So people were like coming up coastally and they're running into these tails. So you've got a porpoise-like body with scaly skin but an alligator's head. Depending on your source, people say it can be like up to 80 feet long. The original tails were closer to about 10 feet. But you know, if you want to get really crazy with it. So here's a little picture of our friend Alti, and you see the very porpoise-like flippers, but he's got that long pointy head. He's very Nessie reminiscent. He's one of those that he doesn't do much. He's just kind of said to be there and exist. And there is some record that pre-colonial legends and stuff, he was kind of like an embodiment of the river, but you don't see a lot of that carried over to the more modern legends. More recently, people have said that he will eat your little dogs, but again, you're not finding a lot of that in the original. In the original, it's just like, I saw this thing and I can't explain it. And so, you know, cover your ears if you don't want to be spoiled, but it was probably local legend combined with the Europeans seeing like a child eating sized alligator gar, which are very freaky fish. And So yeah, you can look them up later. That's a little bit of a nightmare fuel for you. I would freak out about that too. Again, more recently, people love a good monster attack story, so they've started saying that Alfie will sink your boats. But really, he's just a cool dude who lives there, and they actually have a tiny museum dedicated to the Altamaha out by Darien. And start collecting these tiny museums for a good road trip. Let's move on to a lake monster this time, who is, again, very similar in depiction and description. We've got Champ. You might have heard more about him. It's the Lake Champlain monster. Lake Champlain is shared between Vermont and New York and Canada. So it's huge. And this is also a very old legend. It's possibly rooted in Iroquois or Mohawk legends, but I couldn't personally find a confirming source on that, so great result. Said to be more of a serpent-like lake creature, with a head like a horse this time instead of like an alligator. Between 20 and 180 feet long, that's a huge gap, that's a huge margin, but you know, we don't have a ton of records on the early stuff, and things tend to get bigger as time goes on when you're looking at these sorts of stories. This one is described as very Nessie-like, and in fact, it could have very well been settlers who were familiar with Nessie, like Scottish settlers from that area who recognized some similarities in the stories and brought these descriptions of, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about because this is what we had back home. So this is my favorite depiction of Champ. You find some more regal looking ones, but I love the goofy, terrified with his face on this guy. Again, he's said to live there, and he's said to be very sneaky and evasive, and you'll never get a picture of him because he's very sneaky. Again, he doesn't do much. He's more of a tourist attraction, kind of. It's a tourist attraction you don't see. But you find that very often with a lot of these freshwater monsters. You might have also heard of the Alkali Lake monster, also known as the Walgren Lake monster more recently. This one's out in Nebraska, so we're moving out into the Midwest. Formerly called the Alkali Lake monster, they're now leaning more toward the Walgren Lake monster because there's several alkali lakes. And they don't want people getting confused. It's like, this is Walgren Lake in Nebraska. And they also claim that there's native legends, but these are not substantiated. They can't even pinpoint the tribe as to like who first said. So in records that we do have, we see the Walgren Lake monster first reported around the 1900s, like early 1900s. This one is said to be unique in that he's got like distinct front limbs with claws, and he's got a big horn on his head. That's his defining feature. Some will describe him as having 4 legs and he grows like an alligator, and some will describe him as having 2 legs and then on the back fin, kind of like a sea lion or a seal. He's a brownish-green color, and the horn is specifically said to be situated between the eyes and the nostrils, so they're very specific about this. So, you know, the more specific it gets, the more you kind of go, I wonder what they were seeing. Said to be either alligator-like or monkey-like. These are like a kind of giant salamander, for those who don't know. And again, we've got a huge gap in size here, 8 to 40 feet long. eastern Texas and western Mississippi. And so the Latish is an older legend. It's an oral tradition mostly. You don't find a ton of written records about it, so it's a little bit more nebulous. As I said, I am from Arkansas, so like I grew up hearing some of this stuff because the area of Arkansas I am from is the part where it meets Louisiana, and so we spent a lot of time in Louisiana, and so I picked up on a lot of these stories, just because that's where my mom's family is from, and so these are more familiar to me. So I apologize that I don't have a ton of sources on this one. But the Latish is a swamp entity. This is kind of your alligator man situation, where it's a human that has alligator-like features, or occasionally an alligator that has human-like features. There's a lot of variation depending on the teller. That tends to happen in these oral traditions. Sometimes people will say it's like a spirit. It's like a non-corporeal entity. But there's different sources on where they come from, and it's usually along a generational divide. So the older generation tends more toward the explanation of it's the souls of unbaptized children, and because again, Louisiana and Cajun country specifically is heavily Catholic, so you find a lot of Catholic influences in their storytelling. The younger generations tend more toward it was a child who was kidnapped and raised by alligators, and so it became alligator-like. So there's not really images of them. I thought this was funny. There's a guy who makes taxidermy Letitias, and this is one of his. But the sources on what they look like, if anything, are going to be different depending on who you talk to. This is highly regional. But these are our exception as far as the malevolent entities go for freshwater monsters. They are said to hunt swamps in the bayous and steal other children, whether or not they've, been baptized in the Catholic Church or not. They are said to snatch children, so you gotta keep your babies inside at night. You also find them being blamed for capsized boats, especially when people go out alone. You see a lot of this. It's like, oh, they were attacked by a Letitia and never seen again because their boat was bent. And much like a will-o-the-wisp, they're said, or red cap, they're said to confuse travelers off of the correct path. But what's interesting here is that it's all water travel. This isn't like you're wandering through the swamp, this isn't a boat. You're gonna think you're going a safe route, and then you run into a submerged tree. So these guys aren't mean, and they will come and get you. But as far as freshwater monsters go, they're kind of the outlier. So now, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about some freaky dogs. And they're not all canids. I apologize for the misleading category title here. This is my categorization of them. They're more animals or creatures as opposed to like sapient entities. So they're non-intelligent. They could be canine in form, could not, but mostly they're just like they're animals, right? These are where the majority of your monster attack stories are going to come from. They are more aggressive than other kinds of cryptids, not because they're malevolent, but just because that's part of their nature. They're animals, and wild animals can be dangerous. So you get a few who are actively malevolent, but not usually. So they're sometimes there as the unidentified species as opposed to specific entities. Like the Altamaha was like a specific entity. Nessie is a specific entity. These are like, we're talking about a species potentially. The Jersey Devil is an exception. We're going to get more on him in a minute. I just didn't know where to fit him, and I absolutely had to include him. So we're going to start off with the big boy that everyone knows of Chupacabra. So this is our long one because there's been a ton of research into El Chupacabra. This is the first recorded sightings happened more recently, and they happened during an age of fast and digital communication and of plentiful recording devices and methods. So there's a lot of talk about the Chupacabra because we have a lot about it. We have images of reported sightings. We have records that can get spread and really quickly. We have newscasts that can go out and interview people now. It's a whole thing. So there's a lot about this guy. And also, again, personal bias. I may have gone through a phase in high school where I was like dedicated to finding the truth about El Chupacabra because someone claimed they had seen one nearby. And I made a map. I started heavily researching all the different sightings, and I color coded my pin map based on where, what kind of sighting it was, what kind of activity it was, and I made this whole thing, and I thought I had this figured out. And look, it originated in Puerto Rico, and it migrated, and it bred, and it could have very well been a map of human migration and story migration, but I was 16 and I was convinced I had found truth and the proof of existence of El Chupacabra. But anyway, so this is primarily associated with the Southwest, but it did originate in the Southeast. Occasionally you find them in the Midwest as well. The first reported sighting that we have is in the 1990s in Puerto Rico. It was not mainland U.S. What this thing looks like and what it does kind of varies based on location. So you've got more of your southwestern and more of your eastern. So the southwest and midwest is the one you guys are probably more familiar with. It is canine. It walks on all fours. It's like medium dog size to coyote size. It's got fangs and claws and big eyes, and it's got this big bumpy back, and sometimes it has spines or quills. This is your mangy coyote sightings, right? So these are the guys that run around, scurry around, as opposed to the original stories and the more southeastern variety, which is upright or bipedal. Occasionally it'll hunch over and walk on all fours, but for the most part it walks on two legs. It's more reptilian. It's got spines along its back. That's a big part of the story is these sail fins almost. It's got greenish skin and big red eyes. And this is the ones you get that can hypnotize their prey, according to the stories. Sorry guys. So these are more alien-like. And you see that there's a huge difference. I don't know how that shit happened. I don't know where it crossed over from being this little alien dude to this dog dude, but we're just gonna go with it. Chupacabras of both species are said to suck the blood out of livestock. That's where the name comes from. Of course, chupacabra, the goat sucker. It did originally start with goat herds, but he seems to have a preference these days for cows. You find more of the cow predation in the Southwest, mostly because there are more cows in the Southwest. It is said to have a voracious appetite where it can devastate herds overnight. Occasionally you also find chicken flocks getting decimated. But a big thing about this, however, we're categorizing these attacks, is that it does not consume the bodies. It drains the blood, but it does not eat any of the meat. So a little bit of an exception when we're talking about pet and human disappearances. With those, it's I think we're just blaming El Chupacabra for that because it doesn't fit the MO, right? It's oh, and then Barb was never seen again after she walked her little dog. That ain't how El Chupacabra rolls. He turns up at night, sucks the blood out of the herd, and leaves, right? Then we get that I mentioned this hypnotic power that they have to kind of lure their prey. So I don't know if you've ever seen a cat hypnotize a bird, but it's super weird. It's described a lot like that. You do get a few cases of human children claiming to have been seen this thing kind of be hypnotized and drawn toward it, but mostly it's just staring down the prey and they freeze and they don't run. Is according to these stories. They're said to be solitary, not that there's only one, but that their territories are large. They're spread out. Occasionally you will find groups of them in sightings, but for the most part they operate solo. Interestingly, they come in waves. A lot of these sightings, which you find with a lot of cryptids, but let's just talk about our friend here. They kind of hibernate and go dormant, and then they wake up, have a big feed, and then go dormant again. And that makes it really hard to follow them and trace them. Interestingly, a lot of these wake periods will coincide with droughts. Sometimes people will say that they bring the drought as part of a hunting strategy because it groups all the herds in the area to the water source. Other times it's just the drought is what wakes them up. This is a little bit more nebulous and tends more toward the southwest as opposed to the eastern version. But yeah, there's actually a ton of books out there about El Chupacabra. If you want to go looking more into that, I highly recommend them. But let's move on to our fun exception for this round is the Jersey Devil, and he is from, as you may have guessed, New Jersey. So this one is very old. It was first recorded specifically in the 1730s. I believe it was 1735. So you might, in older records, find this guy called the Leeds Devil. We'll get into that in a second. It is a bipedal kind of goat bat creature. You've probably seen depictions of this. So he has leathery bat wings and a goat-like head, but he's got arms with little claws, and he's got cloven hoofed feet. He's got a forked tail, and he screams really loud, and it's really high-pitched. A lot of times you'll see him depicted with glowing red eyes, but not always. That's not an important part of the story. But you've probably seen him running around. He's a very quintessential demon sort of looking guy. And the legend goes that a woman called Mother Leeds, L-E-E-D-S, was about to give birth to her 13th child, and she did not want him. And she declared that if he lived, he would be the devil, so God better strike him down. But he lived, and immediately transformed into this horrible goat bat and flew off into the night. You do find other records that suggest that Mother Leeds had a little something going on with the devil on the side. But the oldest record is going to be this story of the 13th child that was unwanted and was cursed. So this is, as I said, our exception to the general species. This is a singular entity that is said to have either proliferated or just be eternal and migratory. The big thing about him is his scream. He's set up sometimes, but those are later additions. The earliest records that you find talk about his scream, how it can drive you mad just by hearing it, and it's the most horrible. It'll turn blood cold, and big, strong men armed with cannons quake in fear of this sound. I don't have any good recordings of what the sound is approximated to be, and I would not want to listen to something that could drive me mad. But that's a big component of this legend. But you tend to find him all over New Jersey, no, not just southern New Jersey, but he did originate in what is called the Pine Barrens. So there are forests, or there were a lot of forests in southern New Jersey, and that's kind of where this guy came from. He's still said to haunt the area, and some people have claimed to see him outside of New Jersey in Pennsylvania and the like. That is, I didn't know where else to put him, so I'm sorry for putting him in with the dogs. I know he's been through enough. But yeah, as far as malevolence goes, he's not mean, he just got a bad lot in life. I kind of feel sorry for him. We have another odd grouping. I feel like most of my groupings, as much as I tried to keep them similar, ended up being exceptions to the rules, so I'm sorry. But I did want to mention black dog legends. So you may be familiar with a church crypt. The legend of a black dog spirit that haunts a churchyard or guards it, depending. You may be familiar with a Barghest from British mythology. These are spectral dogs. You find a lot of them worldwide to the point that black dog legends are their own subset of mythology. So I had to include them here because they occur nationwide. especially in Eastern and New England areas where there was a lot of direct English colonization. You find them first colonially, occasionally pre-colonially. We are going to talk about one of those in a second. They're huge spectral black dogs. Sometimes they have glowing eyes. They tend to originate in European cultures. And they are highly regional. So I can't go through all of them, but I did highlight a few upcoming, where you're going to find them anywhere from an omen of death to actively malicious to totally benign. You do find guardian spirits. You can find direct import mythology about church grims in a lot of the New England areas. So let's start off with one from Alaska. This is Kivu, or sometimes called Kikirin. It is not imported. It is a native Inuit legend, and it is a hairless dog, a hairless black dog, except it has hair on its ears and feet. And this is really freaky up in the snowy, cold portions of Alaska, right? It's like, why would this creature be hairless? They're kind of an embodiment of winter and starvation. They're both boogeyman and monster. They're said to attack wandering or solo travelers, but they also attack just because. They are actively malevolent. Just seeing one can cause disorientation and hypothermia. So they are a very negative thing. Then in the middle of this spectrum, you have the trucker's dog legends, where long-haul truckers will see a spectral dog running beside the truck, usually when they've been over hours, and it is a warning of an impending fatal crash. So if you see the black dog running, you have to pull over. There are some sources that say it's like the cause of the crash, but for the most part it's seen as a warning as far as my research goes. Then you get the Pine Barrens black dog, which is the furthest end of the spectrum, and he's totally benign. It is said to be the spirit of a cabin boy's dog who was attacked and killed by pirates, and he wanders the beaches at night looking for his owners, totally harmless. And I don't know why they appear to depict him as being so mangy here, but yeah, so it's this really fascinating spectrum between evil and just existing. But you find that all over in a lot of these black dog legends, and there's plenty more. There could even be some local to Utah that like just aren't in an internet search record, so you find these very frequently. And so I felt I had to include them. But then you also, let's move on to a different kind of dog. This is the railroad beast. So this one comes from Wisconsin. It was first reported in 1936. This is your classic wolf man. He is 6 to 7 feet tall, a little bit taller than human. He's humanoid, covered in thick fur. His head resembles that of a wolf. He has glowing eyes, as most of these do. Mostly depicted as orange, sometimes red. And he will either walk on 2 feet or walk on all fours. The original sighting was just one, but in more recent years and in more recent sightings, people claim to have seen multiple of these. Or there are sightings that happen on the same night, impossibly far apart, leading to some to believe that this is not just one beast, that this could be several. So again, as I said, your classic wolf man. He does not do a lot. He's sent to scratch up your car. People will blame him for finding these scratches across their car. There are some reports that he will disembowel small animals, but those reports tend to coincide with large wildlife in the area that also like to eat small pets. So, let's not blame him. And people have reported him commonly as they see him eating roadkill. So he is carnivorous. He does have big claws. It would not be a stretch to think that he might be the cause of your chihuahua going missing. But for the most part, he's never done anything to people aside from cause an insurance headache with the car thing. There are some teenagers who claim that he chased them when they were out doing things that they shouldn't late at night. So maybe he's just, got a moral center. I don't know. You are probably more familiar with this guy, the jackalope. So huge range for this guy. the Midwest and Southwest. He was first recorded in the 1930s and said to be a jackrabbit specifically with antlers or antelope horns. That's where we get jackrabbit, antelope, jackalope. Modern fur explicitly started as a publicity stunt for some taxidermists. They took these kind of older legends and made jackalopes and then sold them as tourist attractions. So it quickly got picked up on and spread as a fact, but it is based on an underlying legend. In the literature, you find these referred to as fearsome critters. It's a type of folklore, and so you see it far back, and it's possibly based on rabbits or jackrabbits that have a specific kind of virus that causes these dermal growths that look like horns or antlers, particularly around the face. I did not include pictures of that because it's like, well, gross. But you all know what a jackalope looks like. He even had a little Pixar thing going on. He said to just be a cute little guy, but if you go back in the record, you formally find him be very aggressive. You're supposed to protect your legs, but he's still like ram your legs and gore you while you're out logging. That was some of the original legends, which there is some debate as to whether it's like a hazing thing to make the new guys like look stupid, where they're wrapping up their legs or wearing tin cans or something to ward off the jackalope. It could be like a snipe hunt sort of situation. But you don't find much of that aggression passed down in the more later versions of the jackalope. So now it's just kind of a symbol of the American Southwest. Similarly, this is one of my favorite guys. I had to get a squonk. This squonk is from Pennsylvania, and he was first recorded in the 1910s. He's said to be a hog-like creature with webbed feet. He's got warty, wrinkly, saggy skin. He's drippy. He's moist, and he sometimes swims, but exclusively in circles. So he doesn't go in the water because he can't get out. He swims in circles until he drowns. He's just a little guy. This is an original drawing of the squonk, the earliest I could find. But more modern depictions. Look at him. Look at him. He is just, I love him so much. He's said to weep incessantly because of how ugly he is. And he's said to be not so bright. It's the swimming in circles thing. He's also said to dissolve into tears if you capture him. So don't get near him. Just let him be. Even though you would like to give the squonk a really big hug. I love this little man. And not a ton of people know about him, but there are a few places where you can get squonk merchandise. And I just had to include him because he needs love in his life. But he also is included in the same category as the jackalope of these like fearsome critters. If you're looking into the literature of it. So I have no idea where this originated from, but I would like to find out and go give this creature a hug. Now we're getting into the stuff that most people know about. This is your Bigfoots. These are your humanoid apes. These are your big ape men. They're generally covered in hair or fur. They walk upright. Per the name, they have very big feet, and that's usually what we find with them, is footprints. They're generally depicted as being larger than a human, taller mostly. They're solitary, mysterious creatures, and so you don't see them or TV. The footage is very grainy. They are not malevolent or violent. They are more polite than a fight creature. They are thought to be intelligent, but opinions on this vary, and it also varies based on the legend. So, the OG Bigfoot. Well, people say when they say Bigfoot, they're thinking of this guy, Sasquatch. So, he originated in the Pacific Northwest and actually more in Canada. You also find occasional records in the Rocky Mountains. It was first recorded in 1988 as we would know Sasquatch or Bigfoot. But there are some native nations that have their own stories pre-dating, particularly as well as the name Sasquatch. So he's said to be 6 to 9 feet tall, so a little bit taller than a tall man. He's covered head to toe in reddish to dark colored fur. eastern half of the US, you go all the way down to Florida, you find Bigfoot's cousin, the skunk ape. So you also find him now kind of outside of Florida, but originally it was just Florida, recorded in the 1810s. So he's 5 to 7 feet tall, so about the size of a man, depending on your source. Again, older is smaller in this case. He's got mottled fur, and he reeks to high heaven. So there's the guy, there's the skunk ape. But remember what I said about black bears being a thing, right? So if you look at this description, 5 to 7 feet tall, with mottled fur and very stinky. To me, as someone who lived in the South, that sounds very much like a black bear, especially because you don't find this guy doing a lot. He said to stare at things, be smelly, and occasionally he will steal your food or eat some livestock. That to me screams black bear. There's this thing that can happen with black bears. There's sun bleaching and there's cinnamon phase. So they both cause kind of this reddish brown fur. And especially with the sun bleaching, they then start shedding it out and it gets very mottled and patchy. That's what we're seeing going on with this black bear on the left. And they tend to walk upright a lot more than other bears do, just because of the way they're built. They will just kind of shuffle along, and when they walk upright, they look like a dude in a bear suit. It's really freaky. So if you go to the country, to the area, and you see one of these things walking around at night, and their eyes kind of, they've got that tapetum lucidum, and it glows, and it can be kind of an orangey yellow color. With their facial patterning, they look kind of like a guy, but they're hairy. They're kind of scruffy. And man, that smell, and you see what I'm saying here is that these are probably black bears. And you see that a lot in all of these southern Bigfoot legends. It's probably black bears. That's not going to stop us from having our fun. But keep in mind that these are most likely bears. Moving on to one from my neck of the woods. This guy is from Arkansas. He is the Fouke Monster. You might know him as the Boggy Creek Monster because of a movie that was made about this. It's from Fouke, Arkansas, which is right by Texarkana, which is where Texas and Arkansas meet. Very clever name. First recorded in the early to mid 1900s, depending on what way you're looking at, but mostly the 50s. 7 to 10 feet tall, depending on the source. Shaggy fur, smells like a skunk and a wet dog put together. Big red eyes, and he swings his arms when he's walking. That all sounds black bear, but interestingly, this one is very specific in that he has only 3 toes. The footprints that were found have 3 toes, which bears have 4 or 5. Bears do not have 3 toes, and apes certainly do not have 3 toes. They have 5. So that is something very peculiar about this. As I said, you may be more familiar with the kind of cult classic movie Legend of Boggy Creek that was based on these incidents that were first recorded in the 50s. So in the original incidents, a farm was attacked by the monster. And by attack, I mean he just kind of showed up and was stinky and clawed up the barn and the house and stuff. He didn't attack people. That's more of a legend inspired by the movie, which kind of took those events and ran with it. So usually he is depicted as being found like in the kind of swampy areas outside of Fouke, because the area is kind of bog and gross and stuff. And he's said to live out there where no one can bother him. So more, again, as we've seen in a lot of these legends, more recently you find people blaming him for attacks and disappearances and stuff. But the original incident was not that big a deal, except to the people it happened to. They were very freaked out by it. But again, he's probably another weird black bear sighting. That does not diminish my love for him, but just putting it out there. You get one from Missouri. This is Momo, not the little bird thing that went around on the internet a few years ago. I don't know what that was about. Momo is short for Missouri Monster, so MO being the postal abbreviation for Missouri, and then Monster, MO. This one actually did not make it outside of Missouri all that much. You may not have heard of this one. It comes from, interestingly, it originates in the town of Louisiana, Missouri. First recorded in the 1970s, I want to say 1973, but I didn't write it down, so I'm sorry about that. Said to have a pumpkin-sized head, so a big round head, about 7 feet tall, with a putrid odor. Again, here's our black bear theme. Dark hair and glowing orange eyes. So, like most skink apes, he's non-aggressive and highly evasive. And there's not a lot out there about him because, again, he didn't make it big. But he's a fun little dude. He's got more of a childish look than some of the others. He's said to eat roadkill and obey posses, like, not even kidding. 1970s, they formed a posse. Missouri, everybody. They formed a posse to go hunting him, and they never got him. He evaded them all. They claimed to have seen him, but he got away. And so he hasn't been seen much lately, but he could still be out there. Maybe he was a migratory stink ape or Bigfoot. We just don't know. But all love to the little guys. You also get the Honey Island Swamp Monster from the south, from Honey Island Swamp in Louisiana. First recorded in 1963. This guy has whole tours you can go take. There's a Honey Island Swamp Monster tour company where you go out in the swamp on a boat, and these guys help you look for the monster, and they tell you all about the guy who first saw it and took casts of the footprints. Said to be about 7 feet tall with long gray hair like the Spanish moss that grows in the area. It's got yellow or red eyes, has a putrid odor, again. It has 4-toed webbed feet that are kind of in between primate and alligator. The origins of this guy vary from a train full of circus chimps crashed and they went out to the swamp and bred and became weird to, it's a giant mutant alligator with, moss growing on it. No one's really sure what started this one. And, it's very specific about these webbed feet. So it makes them a little bit different than a lot of these others. He said to live in the swamp and lumber around and eat wild hogs, which I know there's not really many wild hogs, many feral pigs out in the Utah area, but for people who grew up around them, that actually makes them very fearsome because hogs are scary critters and they're big and they're mean. And so the fact that he eats them is like, whoa, you better watch out. That guy can take on a hog, he will take on you if you go to his house. There's also a book that was loosely inspired by tales of the Honey Island Swamp Monster by Ian Colfer, who wrote Artemis Fowl. It's called High Fire. And I have to plug it because it is the one book that has gotten closest to speaking and writing in a Cajun speech pattern that I've ever found, and it made me very nostalgic for home. There's a few places where your British, your Irish is showing Mr. Colford, but it's very good. Again, PG-13 rating on that one is for the language because he does curse like a southerner in that book. So not recommended for the children. Let's move on to some boogeymen. So what I mean by boogeyman is a monster or legend that's generally used or intended to be a deterrent or a warning, mostly for children, not always. Usually told to discourage children from going places that they shouldn't. They tend to be older and more nebulous because they are these kind of cautionary tales. You get a lot of regional variants. You also get a lot of people being like, well, that's not how I heard it. And again, that's based on, these are kind of teaching lessons. So people are going to personalize them a lot more. They are almost also to be kidnappers. They snatch people, they take people and never return them. They're the reason Motini never came home from the woods. They're the reason you never see your neighbor again. So we're gonna start off back in Louisiana with the Rougarou. everywhere. This is a direct import from the French settlers in the area, from the loup-garou, which is a werewolf legend. And it was first recorded in the 1700s when French settlers arrived in the area. And you might think he's a regular werewolf because he's an imported werewolf, but he's not a regular werewolf. He is the result of a curse or a witch's spell. So it's specifically put on an individual. There are some sources that say it can be passed person to person, but it's usually like directly on the person and they just have to deal with it. Originally, it was divine retribution for breaking Lent. Again, we're seeing that Catholic influence. Sometimes the rougarou will retain his human intelligence. That tends to be a lot older. He just looks like a wolf, but he thinks like a man, and he reasons that he has to get out of town because people are going to be afraid of him. Sometimes, especially in the newer kind of iterations of the tale, he is mindless and bestial like a regular werewolf. Again, it might pass through a bite, might not. It depends on the version. Interestingly, this curse tends to be time limited to 101 days is the most common figure. It's not dependent on moonlight. You are a wolf the whole time. For like half the year, you're a wolf. If you can go that long resisting your urges without drawing human blood, you turn back into a man. Or occasionally, you just have to deal with it whether or not you eat people. You just deal with the fallout when you get back. A big thing in this story is that you don't talk about the rougarou. So people will disappear and then come back and be like, hey Jim, what happened? And Jim knows it nothing. It's like, oh, he was a wolf man for a little while. So he is said to eat disobedient children. This is where that boogeyman status comes in. It's like, you better watch out, or rougarou is going to come get you. He's also said to eat disobedient Catholics. Because again, we're talking cautionary tales. He said to drink the victim's blood, not like swallow them up, but like drink their blood. Again, this is regional, individual. And he hangs out in the swamp, crying and howling. I messed up my slides on this one, sorry guys. So next is the snallygaster, which comes from the Maryland area. Said to be a bird lizard creature, sometimes with tentacles on its face, sometimes not. First recorded in the 1730s from German settlers, the schneller Geist, which means quick ghost, comes from some more classic German poltergeist tales. So I do want to get to, man, I messed up this slide, I'm sorry everybody, I'm tired. So I do want to get to the important part about this, is that this legend was specifically used against Black Americans. So you may not hear a lot about it because it's fallen out of popular favor for very good reason. This was an older legend that was taken and co-opted by people who were against the migration of emancipated Black individuals. So while the original tale may be German and may have been innocuous, it got corrupted pretty bad. It was used to scare freed enslaved people into staying in their place and in their area. It's like, don't go out at night, don't do this, don't move, don't go to the city, you know, all this stuff. It's like they wanted to control these people who they could no longer technically own. And so they used it with some stories and tales that were specifically targeted toward these people. And so we're not going to go into it. It's all very mean and cruel. But that is where you're going to find a lot of your sources on this guy. So please be cautious if you're doing research into the snallygaster, because a lot of it is rooted in that racism. So we don't have a ton on the original, but what we do know is that it was said to fly victims away who were outside alone at night and then drink their blood. You also find this phenomenon in more of the New England area of hexed stars or barn stars, where the sides of barns were decorated with these patterns that were kind of like stars. there's a to ward away evil, and it would also work against the Snallygaster, so you have to be home within range of your barn star at night. And that's where we're seeing some of this boogeyman stuff come in. It's keeping children away from the woods at night because who knows what's out there. So yeah, a little bit of moving back to happier territory. We have the Van Meter visitor. This guy is in Iowa, in Van Meter, first recorded in 1903. Said to be a winged creature that we would recognize nowadays as like a pterosaur that emits a beam of light from its forehead. Isn't that fancy? He's got horns and 3 clawed toes per foot. The original description said it was half human, half animal with enormous bat wings, and claimed that it emitted a powerful stench. And they say it emerged from the local abandoned mine, and they went after it there, and they found it and tried to shoot at it, but it didn't work, and it was this whole thing. You can actually read some of the stories about that. This is a picture of, based on some of those original accounts. He's said to be immune to bullets, and sometimes you find that he's got like a baby one with it in these older stories. Said that they swoop out the mines, letting out their stink and their scream, and then they disappear in the day, never to be seen again. People have gone down into the mines to look, and they can't find it. But if you get too close to the mines, especially at night, they might snatch you. And so again, we're seeing this boogeyman scene of warning people away from dangerous places. Then let's go back to Alaska. You've got the Cryptids, and this is found again more in Canada, but you also get the northern coastal Alaska. Oops, messed that one up too. I'm sorry, guys. I'm gonna blame baby brain. This was first reported pre-colonially. So it is said to be a humanoid kind of creature with webbed hands and long fingernails. It's got long hair and slimy green skin. It's depicted as wearing a parka specifically designed for mothers called the amauti, and those are the parkas that have the pouch on the back for a baby, because this is another child snatcher. The Kalipalik will snatch children that wander near the ice floes and the shores. They wade in the water and then grab the children. It says that it's said to use children to sustain their eternal youth or their beautiful hair, or just devour them. They're also said to be able to shapeshift into other animals. But we're seeing this used primarily as a deterrent to keep children away from dangerous areas. There are some versions of this legend that will say it will attack anyone who's near the ice floe. Most of the tales are about children. Let's move on to some spooky guys now that we're getting more humanoid as time goes on. So these are generally bipedal. They kind of look like people. They may or may not be intelligent. A lot of these stories we don't know. But and there is some overlap with alien stories and extraterrestrial encounters. Saying that might be a bit controversial and can make some people really mad when you're talking cryptozoology. Some people completely separate UFOlogy and alienology and all of that. I don't. But, you know, be warned. And I'm sorry if anyone out there is a diehard alien believer and is like, how dare you list aliens in with the cryptids? There are pretty specific explanations for all of these sightings that I'm about to list. I have included them because I personally think they're neat. Just plug your ears. I'll warn you when we're about to do it if you don't want to be spoiled. So first up is the Dover Demon, found in Dover, Massachusetts. It was first recorded in 1977. And he was said to be about 4 feet tall, with glowing orange eyes and gray skin. He has a watermelon-shaped head with no mouth or nose that are visible, and quadrupedal, frequently depicted with long, spindly limbs and digits. This is actually an original drawing by the boy who claimed to have seen it, and he wrote on the drawing that he swears on the Lord that he saw this creature. And other people have also claimed that they've seen it, but it was generally around the same time frame, and it was generally young people who were out at it in the late hours. This is the one that has the fewest explanations proposed, but the most commonly accepted is that it was either a moose calf or a foal or a snowy owl that was carrying prey, because where the boy said he saw it was on like a low stone wall. It was kind of stumbling about. It had these long gangly limbs, right? So the head shape definitely looks like a baby goose. But the glowing orange eyes are more like an owl. So an out-of-season snowy owl in the area could very well have found some kind of small prey that it was dragging about, and you know how prey looks when an animal started eating it, and then it gets startled and it tries to fly away or wander away. You know, it's carrying something heavy, it can't really fly. So a lot of people tend more toward the snowy owl explanation. I personally like the baby moose explanation because I just like moose and think they're cute. But these next ones are all very specific and pretty commonly accepted. We have Mothman. He is another one you've probably heard of, despite him not, doing a lot. He's from Point Pleasant, West Virginia. He was first reported in 1966, and people claimed to have seen a winged humanoid with glowing red eyes. It's person-sized, and it has an unearthly shriek. Sometimes he's even depicted as having feathers or moth scales. Original depictions had him be kind of naked, not a lot going on, as far as body coverings go. So there's an image people claim to be of Mothman. I don't know what that's about, but the explanation here, and plug ears if you don't want to know, is a sandhill crane. You see the big red spots, and they're very tall birds, and they fly about, and especially if they were carrying something, and especially, they're not usually around that area. So, seeing one of those, it's probably what sparked all the Mothman stuff, especially because it was in the same area, or a lot of the first sightings happened within a few days of each other. People were seeing this. So it was probably the lost sandhill crane, especially the way that the unearthly shrieking is described. Their call is very eerie. Another bird sighting, we have the Kelly Green Men, sometimes called the Hopkinsville Goblins. This one comes from Kentucky, Christian County, Kentucky. 1955 is when it was reported. One night, a family comes running into the police station saying that their farm has been under attack for hours by these little men, these little goblin creatures. And they've been shooting at them, and nothing's happened, and they finally got away. It's said to be hordes of little men who are like gray or green, and they got big ears and big eyes, and they were out all night, and they got big hands flapping around. They emerged from some kind of round saucer-like thing, and this is where we're starting to see overlap with alien stories. Some say that they were wearing some kind of metallic, shiny clothing or armor, but those may be later additions. I couldn't personally find any of that in the original record. They're fun little dudes, but the generally accepted explanation for the Hopkinsville Goblins are great horned owls, which, if you're out west, you're familiar with these guys. They're not usually around Kentucky, so if you saw a pair of these, which there were two that are confirmed, like based on the stories that people were giving and explaining what happened, there was at least two. There probably wasn't more than that because of the time frame that we're seeing them in these stories, but so a lost or out of migration, out of territory pair of great horned owls would absolutely have big glowing orange eyes. And if it's hanging out in a tree at night, it's going to look way bigger than it actually is. And, its wings resting and stuff could look very well like hands, which I don't know. Maybe this isn't interesting to everybody, but I think it's fun how many of our stories come from just wildlife being where they shouldn't, or being in a way people don't expect. I think it's fun. And I love that these owls are a bunch of goblins, you know, it's just funny to me. We also have the Loveland frog. This one is in Ohio, first reported in 1955, said to be about 4 feet tall, bipedal frog-like sort of man. Sources vary on whether his whole body was like a frog or just the face was like a frog, but it's generally accepted to have this kind of leathery skin, frequently described as being gray or brown or greenish. Some versions have one that like has a magic wand and stuff. I couldn't find a lot on that, but people claim to have seen them in a group, and one of them had a sparky magic wand. So maybe they're little frog magicians. The first big sighting of this one, a few days later, someone claimed to have shot and killed one. And this did not make it into the public record for reasons that you might find obvious, but it was confirmed to be an iguana without a tail. And just based on examining it afterward, they determined it was probably a pet iguana that someone couldn't take care of anymore and released. And the poor creature had been wandering about, and his tail got injured and either fell off or was eaten off. This PSA, don't release your exotic pets. Don't release any of your pets if you can't take care of them. Find a rescue. But you know, it was 1955. So iguanas can climb fences, which is where the guy had seen this. He was trying to climb over a guardrail. And so he shot it because he was like, what the heck is that? And, but, you know, that's much less fun than a frogman. So people didn't pass around the iguana part all that much. But it is in the record that at least the specimen that was killed and presented to the sheriff was a tailless iguana. Let's move on to our team players. So this is our last category. I know we're all getting a little bit tired. So these are the entities that are explicitly said to occur in groups. They're collectives. They are pretty widespread. They have widespread territory or like area of belief and occurrence. They're not restricted to one specific place, so you find these legends kind of spread all over. The legend is about the group itself, so you're not going to find individuals usually. They range from totally benign, just existing, to sometimes helpful, to occasionally malevolent. Sometimes, and these are the ones we gotta watch out for, they're sometimes rooted in spiritual or religious systems. So tread carefully, be respectful, defer to the culture and religion of origin and their position on how to take these things. First up, we have the Fresno Nightcrawlers. You've probably seen these little guys. They originate in California, not Fresno specifically, that's where the first video of them comes from, because these are more recent. They're first reported in 2007. They're pale, white, grayish. They kind of look like a pair of legs with not much else going on. They just kind of bebop around like a pair of stilts. They're long and spindly, maybe person-sized. Some reports said that they're even taller, but most of them are just like roughly pants-sized. They will sometimes appear in small herds. It's these little guys. You may have seen a video. There's videos out there of people who have claimed to catch these night crawlers on their security cameras. Again, they don't do much. These are the benign ones. They're said to just be little guys, and they look kind of like a little Among Us guy bebopping around. They don't have arms. Some people will depict them as having these really cute little button eyes. You find that in a lot of emerge, but the original legend does not have any eyes. They're just legs that wander around. I wish we had more about them because they're very charming to me. I love them. Let's move on to Hawaii. We haven't actually touched on Hawaii. We got Puerto Rico, we got Alaska, now let's go to Hawaii. We have the Night Marchers, or okay, I'm not going to pronounce it because I'm very bad at it, but I have written here the pronunciation. You find this first recorded in pre-colonial contact, mostly as an oral tradition, but they are said to be ghostly warriors, guards of the local noble, who walk through the air at night. They carry their weapons and they chant and they blow tones on their conch shells, and they're accompanied by a death-like order, and they march continuously until sunrise. So they are said to not be malevolent, but they are protective. They will kill or destroy mortals who look upon them, but more specifically their leader. This is the part of Hawaiian, like early Hawaiian religious belief, where the leadership was kind of seen as divine, and there were certain areas of the chief or leader that you weren't supposed to look upon, and so you're not supposed to do that. And if you do, these kind of guarding warriors will attack. These are also said to be specific spirits or followers, but it's not just some ghostly horde. It's like these were people who actually lived. These are spirits. And so you can actually be saved from retribution by them if you accidentally look upon them. And if one of your ancestors is in the march and recognizes you and claims you. And some versions will also say if you show them proper respect by like lying down on the ground and averting your eyes, that you will be saved as well. I'm not going to go into it more deeply than that because even though it's not a strictly religious belief, it is pretty tied up in that sort of spiritual culture, and so it's not really my place to go deeper into it. But everything that I found, I specifically found articles of Native Hawaiian scholars discussing this belief, so I felt it was okay to kind of repeat those things that I heard. Then you get will-o'-the-wisps, or more specifically in the South, you get the Fifale. These are an imported belief. You find it in the areas that were directly colonized by Europeans, Appalachia specifically, New England. Then moving into the South and Southeast, you find variants that have been more localized, but they're first recorded in the colonial period because they came directly from Europe. You get these unexplained lights or glowing orbs. They're spiritual kind of glowy entities. They're not corporeal. They tend to be an eerie, unnatural color. They occur primarily in marshy or swampy areas. They lead people off of the safe paths to sink into the water. They're said to be kind of trickster spirits, where they will purposefully trick you off the path. Sometimes you find that they mark the location of the treasure, but you gotta be careful because they'll trick you. It's like you think you're going for a treasure and then plop into the water. And again, these are directly imported from European mythology. So you find will-o'-the-wisp and jack-o'-lantern is an earlier version of what we now call jack-o'-lantern, but it was like jack of the lantern. And it's a whole thing. It's really fascinating etymology. But in the deep south, you get Fifale, closer to Cajun country, and those are the Fa'afale. That's like the fool's fires, and that also is an imported belief. So a lot of this, the sources are going to be European, and then it's just people who brought it over, kind of repeating what they're hearing. In some of these legends, you find that they are kind of like they mark a place that's in stasis between heaven and hell. So like a spirit that can't cross over, or a ghost or a demon or whatever that's trapped or something. It's really fascinating, and I wish I had more information about that, but I wasn't able to find a ton in the research that I was doing, but maybe someone out there is a will-o'-the-wisp expert. Similarly imported, you find Tommyknockers, or the Welsh Coblynau. They are mine spirits. So you find them primarily in Appalachia, but then they were transported to the American Southwest, where there was a lot of that gold mining and silver mining happening. But originally, and more commonly these days, you're going to find the knockers, the Tommyknockers, in the Appalachian Mountains and in the coal mining areas. They were first reported in the 1820s with the first wave of Welsh and Cornish and Devon immigrants. They are invisible spirits. Occasionally they will manifest or be depicted as a small elfish little man. And they're generally depicted as wearing miner's garb. They look like a little guy. They are said to knock as a warning for cave-ins or gas leaks. They tend to have, when they're depicted as being visible, they have a large head, long arms and wrinkly skin, big hands for knocking. But most of what you're going to find is just the non-corporeal kind of spirit, disembodied sort of stuff going on. And most of the modern legends are restricted to them knocking as a warning. But there is some research, some record that has them more actively participating in the mine, but their whole purpose was to protect miners. And so you show them respect by giving them the last little bit of your lunch, and you better watch out, because if you leave the mine messy, they will steal your stuff. And so sometimes in images and depictions of them, you find them being decorated with the things they stole from the miners. They can be very mischievous, especially in a lot of the older versions. Interestingly, I phrase it here as them being unionized, because you find tales of people, they're looking for more miners, they're looking for more workers in mines. So they ask the workers that they have. It's like, hey, do you know anybody? And they say, yeah, my cousin or my uncle or whatever. If you pay his passage, he'll come over. But another stipulation a lot of these people had was that the knockers, or the Kopanai, were already on site. There were a lot of people who would not come to work at a mine without confirmation that the Tommy knockers were already present. And when a mine was shut down, you had to release them from their duty to the mine, or they'd be stuck there forever. And so they were seen kind of as co-workers almost. And if you didn't treat your workers well, or you didn't treat the mine well, or you disrespected the Tommy knockers, they would leave, and they would stop protecting the mine. It's a fascinating sort of legend, and there's not a lot on it in American mythology, but if you start looking into more of the European knockers and Kopanai, that's where you find a lot of this stuff that was directly imported. So I felt like I had to include them, even though the sources, if you go looking on your own, they're going to be mostly European. I do want to preface that. So that is the ones that I had. And now a lot of you noticed that there are a few I left out. Generally, if I've left it out and it's a big deal, it's because that is not something that I am okay talking about. If it's not part of my culture, I'm not really going there unless it has been said, yeah, this is okay. There are parts of living cultures and religions that have specifically asked, is hey, I'm not cool with outsiders talking about this stuff because you don't have the proper context to discuss it in depth. So those are where we get into skinwalkers. So it is part of closed Navajo mysticism and frequently kind of misappropriated, misused, and misunderstood. I am not Navajo, so I'm not going to go there because I have found a lot of sources that have said specifically, it's hey, if you're not Navajo, leave it to us to talk about this. That's where Wendigo comes in. This is a closed cultural taboo that's spiritually significant to Algonquin-speaking native cultures, and the frequent modern depiction of the Wendigo as this big deer antlered man creature is totally not what it is in the original mythology. Same with Thunderbird. Although Thunderbird is more sacred rather than taboo, and it's kin to deity, and then frequently reduced to something much less in this cultural context, and much less than what people who it's sacred to kind of believe about it. So I will briefly touch on each of these to kind of describe in general what it is, but I'm not going to go into it. So skinwalkers are said to be known to shapeshift, frequently depicted as shifting into coyotes. Wendigo is a spirit of famine and winter that is specifically associated with cannibalism. And again, it's culturally taboo. You don't really talk about Wendigo because you don't want to bring it on yourself. Thunderbird is less touchy because a lot of cultures have a Thunderbird myth. And, but there are still Native societies here in the U.S. that specific myths about Thunderbird. It is a great bird who either is born of or brings lightning in them. And that's as far into it as I'm going to go because there's a lot of misunderstood, kind of misappropriated stuff about Thunderbird as it appears in Pacific Northwest and American Southwest specifically. But where can you go to learn more about these and learn about them from their proper context? I did find some stuff in New Mexico about the skinwalkers from some Navajo who live in the area. There's a website called Facing History, short for Facing History and Ourselves, that talks more about Wendigo stories. And then, regardless of what you have been told, Wikipedia can actually be a great source of learning if you go to their sources. So go and read the article, look at stuff, and where they have the little number, they have the little footnote, you click on that, it's going to take you down to the sources that they reference. So a lot of those you're going to find papers from universities or books that were sponsored by universities. Go look at the university affiliations, go look at the author, and and then from there you can go into Google Scholar or you can just regular Google and find more from those authors about the topic. So again, I apologize I don't have a ton on these. I know a lot of them are favorites of people, but it just wasn't really my place as someone who's not part of these cultures to go super in depth on them. But there are people out there in the wonderful digital age who are super cool about answering questions and want to tell you more about like, hey, this is what I want people to know about my living culture. So there we go. So final thoughts and questions. There's always more. Go talk to the old people in your chosen area if you want to know more about local stories. There's always an explanation for these things. Doesn't mean you can't have fun with it. So yes, we talked a lot about animals being where they shouldn't, but no, it's still fun. And there's no one right or wrong way to tell these stories. So if I told it differently than you heard it, I apologize, but isn't that the beauty of storytelling, is we all have our own connections to things. If you want to talk more about this stuff, you can catch me on social media or catch me by email, tchendricks@gmail.com. It also doesn't have to be about this. It can be about anything you want to talk about authorly. You know, you're like, oh, I really like little spooky stories. I want to read your stuff. Hit me up. I apologize that some of my social media isn't quite up to snuff yet. I've moved across the country and got pregnant and adopted a dog and sent my oldest off to kindergarten all in the past few months. So this is a time of transitions, but I'm hoping that in the next few weeks I will have more on like advanced reading for certain things. But as always, I can talk about this kind of stuff. I can talk about stories all day. So if you have questions that can't be covered here, let me know. I'm always happy to talk about that. So that being said, did anybody have questions about anything we talked about?
Any questions from anyone? I'm just repeating your question. It looks like I think we're all set. Thank you so much for coming. It was a wonderful presentation. Here. Oh.
That's a Bigfoot.
Oh.
A biologist from Utah.
Wanna, if you hold it closer, maybe she can see it too.
I had a biologist that
right here. A little bit further back.
He said that it was a Bigfoot.
All right, all the way down to Utah.
Yeah. And then also the Utes believe in that skinwalker.
Mm-hmm.
And so, And also the Navajos on that
Mhm.
bird. Anyway, that's what happened. That was just a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, that is so cool.
That's really cool. Thank you.
That is. No, I don't have any more. Do you have any questions? It was interesting. I enjoyed it. That was
Thank you.
fun. So she wanted to come and she got me interested in it, so it's good. Thank you.
Right. Well,
We'll
thank
see
you
you
so
guys.
much for coming.
Yep.
I'm gonna go ahead and end our live stream then.
Yeah.
And
Now,
thank
wish
you.
You could say, well, that's true about the skinwalker. I mean, about the Bigfoot.